She worked long hours in a small, crowded cafe, a place filled with the smell of coffee, pastries, and the faint temps of cleaning supplies. Every morning she arrived early, tying her hair back and putting on her apron, ready for another day of endless orders and polite smiles. Customers barely noticed her. To them, she was just part of the furniture, moving efficiently, answering questions, and carrying trays without complaint. But behind her eyes was a world no one could see. A quiet life of dreams that refused to fade. Her days began in the early hours, when the streets were still half asleep and the sun was only beginning to touch the rooftops. She would step into the cafe, the bell above the door ringing softly, and immediately start preparing. Cups were polished, tables wiped, and the air filled with the faint hum of the espresso machine. She moved with practiced grace, almost like she was dancing to music no one could hear. Every action, from pouring coffee to placing a slice of cake in front of a customer, was precise and careful. She had learned long ago that small details mattered, that the world might overlook her. But she could not overlook herself. Despite the routine, there were moments when she felt invisible. Moments that reminded her of how ordinary her life seemed. A group of friends laughed loudly in the corner, sharing stories while she passed their table unnoticed. An elderly couple thanked her politely, then turned back to each other without another glance. She smiled anyway, feeling the familiar tug of loneliness, a reminder that her life was mostly about other people's needs. She did not complain. She had learned to survive in silence, carrying her burdens quietly, moving through life without causing ripples. Yet, beneath the ordinary exterior, there was something extraordinary waiting to breathe. At the back of the cafe, tucked into a corner and mostly ignored, was an old piano. Its wood was scratched, its keys slightly yellowed with age, but it was still a piano, still capable of magic. She passed it every day, her hand sometimes brushing the edge, feeling the warmth of the wood, the faint vibration of its strings. It was a reminder of who she had once been, of a life that had almost been hers, of music that had once filled her days with joy. But life had other plans. Bills had to be paid, responsibilities met, and dreams quietly folded away like worn sheets in a forgotten drawer. When the cafe was empty for a few minutes, she would sometimes linger near the piano. She would run her fingers over the keys lightly, almost absent-mindedly, remembering the sound, the touch, the way music had once felt like breathing. There was a small spark in those moments, a tiny flame of hope that she dared not let grow too bright. If anyone saw her, they might laugh or think she was silly. But in those quiet seconds, she was not a waitress. She was a musician, a dreamer, a person capable of something beautiful that no one else could see. Her life outside the cafe was simple and practical. She lived in a small apartment, just large enough to hold her necessities, spent her evenings cooking simple meals, washing dishes, and occasionally watching a program on the tiny television. It was a life shaped by routine and necessity, but she carried it with quiet dignity. She had friends, but few, because she did not have time for many social engagements. Most nights she walked home alone, the streets empty, her thoughts full of music she could not yet share. The city felt different at night, softer, less demanding. And sometimes she imagined herself walking down its streets, carrying a melody that only she could hear. Her past was never far from her mind. As a child, she had discovered the piano in a quiet music school near her home. Her fingers had moved across the keys as if they belonged there, creating sounds that seemed to lift the walls of her small life. Teachers had praised her talent, and for a brief time, it seemed that music could carry her away from the difficulties of her family life. But life had a way of interrupting dreams. Financial problems, the need to help at home, and unexpected hardships had forced her to stop lessons. The piano became a memory, a dream deferred, and she learned to live without it, though it never left her entirely. Even as she moved through the cafe, serving coffee and cakes, she sometimes imagined melodies in her mind. Simple tunes that she could hum quietly under her breath, unnoticed by anyone around her. These melodies were her companions, her private joys. She would sometimes close her eyes for a brief moment when cleaning a table, pretending that the clatter of cups in conversation was just background to her own private concert. It was not enough, but it was better than nothing. In these small ways, she kept the music alive, hidden but not gone. Some days were harder than others. A rude customer, an impossible order, with the sheer exhaustion of long shifts could weigh on her, but she carried it all silently. Her co-workers treated her politely, but with little warmth. She did not mind. She had long stopped expecting more than civility from the world. Yet, even on the most difficult days, she found small moments of joy. A child's smile, the soft nod of a regular customer, or the brief quiet of the cafe before the rush brought a sense of peace. A reminder that life, though harsh, could still hold small beauty. Despite her resilience, there was a part of her that longed for more. She longed to sit at a piano that worked properly, to feel the sound of her own music filling the air, to look into someone's eyes and see their hearts moved by something she had created. It was not fame she wanted, nor wealth. It was simply recognition, a chance to share what had always lived quietly inside her. The thought of this possibility sometimes kept her awake at night, lying on the thin mattress of her apartment, staring at the ceiling, imagining herself playing for a room full of people who truly listened. Her routine never truly allowed for these dreams to come alive. Each day blended into the next, a cycle of work and small moments of reflection. She rarely spoke of her past, rarely let anyone know of the music that had once defined her life. Friends and coworkers assumed she was just practical, maybe even a little quiet. They did not see the hunger in her eyes, the longing for something beyond the walls of the cafe. But she did not need them to understand. She carried the music in her own way, silently, carefully, waiting for the moment when it could no longer stay hidden, even as her life felt ordinary. There were signs that something was about to change. The old piano in the corner seemed to call to her more often than before. Customers sometimes left the cafe in a hurry, leaving a quiet space behind, and she would feel a strange pull toward it. There was a tension in the air, as if the world were preparing her for something she could not yet name. She could not ignore it, even if she tried. Each day, the pull grew stronger, and with it, a tiny, quiet hope began to stir. A hope that maybe, just maybe, the life she had imagined could still exist somewhere beyond the counter and the cups of coffee, though she was just a waitress to everyone else. She carried the weight of a life unfulfilled. And in that weight, there was beauty, there was strength, and there was a longing that would not be silenced. Each day she moved through the motions, but inside, she was alive with the music she had once known, waiting for the moment when the world would finally hear her, when her fingers could dance across the keys again, and when she could step out from behind the apron into the light she had long believed was not meant for her. Her life outside the cafe was quiet, but her mind often wandered back to her childhood. Two memories of a time when the piano had been the center of her world. She had grown up in a small home where space was limited and money was always tight. Even as a child, she had known that the world required sacrifices, and she had learned early on to find joy in small moments. Still, music had always been her escape, the one place where she could forget everything else and simply be herself. She remembered the first time she had touched a piano. It had been at a tiny music school a few streets from her home, a place that smelled faintly of polished wood and old sheet music. Her fingers had hesitated over the keys at first, unsure, but as soon as the sound came out, something inside her had shifted. The teacher had smiled, seeing a spark of talent that was rare in someone so young. Lessons were not easy, but she had loved every second of them. The piano became her friend, her confidant, a place where she could pour all of her thoughts, fears, and dreams. For a while, it had felt like a future was waiting for her, a future where she might become a musician, perform in front of people, and feel the thrill of creation. But life had other plans. Her family struggled to make ends meet. There were bills to pay, younger siblings to care for, and an endless stream of small crises that demanded her attention. Lessons, once so precious, became a luxury that she could no longer afford. She had tried to balance it all, but slowly she had been forced to let go, to trade the piano for responsibilities, to place her dreams on a shelf where they gathered dust. Even as she grew older and started working in the cafe, the piano never truly left her. Every day, as she moved through the motions of her job, she carried the music inside her, hidden but alive. At home, she sometimes hummed melodies quietly, pretending that the walls around her were an audience. Her fingers were moving across a real keyboard. It was not enough, but it kept the fire alive. She knew she had talent, she knew she had passion, and she knew that one day, somehow, it might find a way back into her life. Her memories were filled with a mix of joy and regret. She remembered competitions she had entered, small local events where she had performed in front of strangers, and felt a thrill that no applause at the cafe could ever match. The pride on her parents' faces, the rare moments of happiness that music had brought to her home, but those moments had been fleeting. The pressures of life had pushed her to the background, and the piano had become something she longed for, but rarely touched. It was a quiet ache in her chest, a reminder of what could have been. At the cafe, the old piano in the corner was a constant reminder of that past. Most customers ignored it, assuming it was merely decorative, a piece of furniture collecting dust. But to her, it was much more than that. Scratches and faded keys told stories of music that had once filled rooms, and she felt a strange connection to it. Some days she would linger nearby, her fingers brushing the keys lightly, imagining the sound they might make. It was almost painful, this mixture of longing and restraint. She wanted to play, but she was careful not to let anyone see. The world had already taught her that talent alone was not enough. She thought often about the dreams she had once held and the path she had not taken. She wondered what might have happened if circumstances had been different. If she had been able to continue lessons, if she had been given the chance to perform for a larger audience. The questions haunted her, not with bitterness, but with a quiet sadness, a sense of loss that she carried carefully. And yet there was also hope, faint but persistent, like a small light that refused to be extinguished. Her coworkers rarely understood her. They saw her as diligent and quiet, capable of handling the busiest shifts without complaint. Some admired her for her work ethic, but none knew the world she carried inside her. She had learned to keep it that way. Music was private, sacred, and she had been hurt before by people who could not understand its importance. So she kept her hands off the piano, her stories to herself, and her heart just slightly guarded. Still, there were moments when the music called to her too strongly to ignore. In the evenings, after the cafe closed and the last customers had left, she sometimes stayed behind. The lights dimmed, the chatter gone, and the world quiet. She would sit at the old piano, letting her fingers find the familiar keys. The sound was not perfect. The piano was old, slightly out of tune, but it was enough. It reminded her that she was still capable, that the dreams of her childhood had not disappeared entirely. For a few minutes, the stress, the exhaustion, and the routine melted away, and she became herself again. Not a waitress, not an invisible worker, but a musician, a dreamer, and a person with a voice that could speak through melody. These private moments were sacred. She would close her eyes, letting the music flow naturally, each note a small rebellion against the life she had been forced to accept. The cafe, once a place of routine and monotony, became a stage, a place where she could practice not just the piano, but the courage she needed to hold on to her dreams. It was not performance, it was preparation, a quiet reminder that she had not given up, that the fire inside her still burned. Even as she sat there, lost in the music, she felt the tension of her daily life pressing against her. Bills, responsibilities, and the endless routine of work waited for her outside the cafe walls. But in those moments it did not matter. Music had a power to suspend time, to create a small world where nothing else existed, and in that small world she was free. She could imagine audiences clapping, judges smiling, strangers moved by her performance. It was a world that belonged to her alone, a world where dreams were still possible. Sometimes she thought about the future and it frightened her. The idea that she might never perform in front of anyone, that her music might remain private forever, was almost unbearable. Yet, she also believed deep down that life had a way of offering second chances. It might not come quickly or easily, but the possibility existed, waiting for a moment when courage and opportunity met. She held on to that thought, using it to survive long shifts, to smile politely at demanding customers, and to find small joys in the routines that others found tiresome. Her love for music was not about recognition or fame. It was about expression, about feeling alive in a world that often demanded conformity and silence. She remembered times when a single piece of music had brought tears to her eyes, when the beauty of sound had made the world seem brighter, warmer, and full of possibility. Those memories were her secret strength, her reason to keep going even when days felt long and burdensome. Music reminded her that she was more than a waitress, more than a set of routines, more than an unnoticed face behind the counter. Despite her quiet determination, she was human, and loneliness sometimes crept in. Seeing other people live lives of passion and recognition could sting, even as she tried to be happy for them. But she never allowed envy to dominate her heart. Instead, she let it fuel her longing, a gentle reminder of what she loved and what she might one day reclaim. Each evening at the piano, each private rehearsal, was a step toward that reclamation, a step toward proving to herself that the dream had never truly died. The cafe itself, with its chatter, clinking cups, and constant motion, became a backdrop to her secret life. To the customers, it was ordinary, familiar, and mundane. To her, it was a stage of opportunity. She had begun to notice small details, the way the sunlight fell across the old piano, the way a quiet corner could provide a moment of solitude, the way even a brief pause in the day allowed her mind to wander into the world of music. She became attuned to these small gifts. Seeing possibilities where others saw routine, she also began to notice how music affected people around her. Even when she was not playing, a child humming along to a tune on the radio, a customer tapping their fingers in rhythm, or a stranger smiling at a familiar song, reminded her that music existed in every life, waiting to connect with hearts. She imagined herself creating these moments, imagining her melodies reaching beyond her private practice, touching others and making them feel the way music had always made her feel. The thought was thrilling, almost intoxicating, and it strengthened her resolve. Even with these quiet joys, she remained cautious. I had learned to protect her dreams, to guard the fragile flame of hope from disappointment. Every day at the cafe was a test of patience, endurance, and resilience. She carried her dual life, carefully serving customers with grace, while nurturing a private world of melody, practicing without an audience, imagining applause that might never come. It was a delicate balance, one that required both courage and humility. And she handled it with quiet, unwavering determination. And yet, despite her care, there were moments when the longing became almost unbearable. Walking past the piano, feeling the keys under her fingers, hearing a faint note resonate in the air, these moments stirred something deep inside her, a combination of joy, sadness, and anticipation. She did not always understand it herself, but she knew that these feelings were signs of life. Signs that her dreams were still possible, even if only in secret. Her story was not one of immediate success or dramatic change. It was the story of persistence, of holding on to something precious when the world had told her to let it go. It was the story of a woman who had been forced into routine and practicality, but who refused to surrender the fire of creativity inside her. Every day she survived, every night she played in secret. In every moment she allowed herself to imagine a different life was a victory in itself. Even as she returned home each night, tired and worn, she carried the hope of music with her. She imagined a future where she could sit at a piano without fear, without distraction, and let the world hear her voice. She imagined applause, smiles, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had stayed true to herself. It was a dream that felt both distant and possible, fragile but unbroken, and it became her guiding light, her reason to keep moving, to keep working, and to keep believing. And so she lived, balancing two worlds, the visible, ordinary life of a waitress and the hidden, extraordinary life of a musician. Each day brought new challenges, new frustrations, and new reminders of what she had sacrificed. Each evening brought a brief, precious moment of freedom, a chance to touch the piano, to let music flow through her, and to remember who she truly was. It was not an easy life, but it was hers, and she faced it with courage, hope, and an unshakable belief that one day the world might finally hear what she had to offer. The cafe was unusually busy that evening. The usual hum of conversation had grown into a low roar, the clatter of cups and dishes blending with the occasional ring of the doorbell. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, taking orders, carrying trays, and apologizing politely for the wait. Her smile never faltered, but inside, exhaustion was building. She had been working back-to-back shifts for days, and the long hours were taking their toll. Her feet ached, her hands were sore from carrying heavy trays, and her mind felt fuzzy from constant focus and alertness. Yet, she kept going, because she had learned that the world did not pause for fatigue. It had been one of those evenings where everything seemed slightly off. A regular customer argued over an incorrect order. A child knocked over a glass of water, sending the table into mild chaos. A group of tourists asked a question that she had already answered with. She felt the familiar tension rise, a mixture of frustration and fatigue, but she swallowed it down. She had learned long ago that the world rarely offered kindness without effort, and she refused to let irritation show. She could not afford to. Her composure was a shield, her smile a tool of survival. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was a strange energy in the room. Something about the rush, the noise, and the impatience created a tension that was almost electric. She felt it in her chest, a subtle pressure that made her heart beat faster. The old piano in the corner seemed to hum with the energy, its worn wood reflecting the soft light from the cafe windows. She glanced at it briefly, feeling that familiar tug of longing. Normally, she would have ignored it, pretending it did not exist, keeping her dreams safely tucked away. But tonight, the pull was stronger, almost impossible to resist. It started with a small, impulsive thought. She remembered the melodies she'd been practicing in secret, the pieces she had imagined performing for an audience that existed only in her mind. One melody in particular had been playing in her thoughts all day, a gentle, flowing tune that seemed to match the rhythm of the evening. She hesitated for a moment, weighing the risk. The cafe was crowded, and she was, after all, just a waitress. What if someone laughed? What if she made a mistake? The thought of embarrassment was powerful, but so was the longing to play, to express, to let the music flow from her hands. Before she fully realized what she was doing, she moved toward the piano. Her coworkers were busy, the customers were distracted, and the noise of the room provided a kind of cover. She reached out, brushing her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the familiar texture beneath her touch. The piano was slightly out of tune, the middle key stiff from disuse, but it responded to her nonetheless. She sat down on the small bench, taking a deep breath, feeling her heart race. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, allowing herself to imagine a world where her music could be heard, where the noise of the cafe faded into the background, leaving only the sound of her hands moving over the keys. The first note was quiet, almost hesitant, as if testing the room, testing her own courage. But it resonated, pure and clear, cutting through the hum of conversation. She continued, her fingers finding their rhythm, the melody beginning to take shape. At first it was simple, almost tentative, but with each passing second, her confidence grew. The room began to change around her. Conversation slowed, laughter softened, and a subtle stillness spread through the crowd. People turned their heads, curious about the sound that seemed so unexpected. So incongruous in the middle of the bustling cafe, she did not look at the audience. She did not need to. Her focus was entirely on the music, on the way each note could express something she could not put into words. Memories of her childhood, of lessons long forgotten, of moments when she had felt alive with the joy of creation filled her mind. Her fingers moved more confidently, her hands finding patterns that seemed natural, almost instinctive. The old piano, worn and imperfect, responded to her touch as if recognizing a long-lost friend. The melody flowed, delicate and expressive, carrying with it all the emotion she had kept hidden for years. The customers noticed the shift immediately. Some paused mid-conversation, forks in hand, eyes widening as they recognized the skill and emotion behind the music. A few quietly put down their phones, no longer scrolling or texting, caught entirely by the unexpected performance. Even the regulars, familiar with her quiet efficiency behind the counter, were struck. They had never seen this side of her, this hidden depth that could transform a simple cafe into something extraordinary. Whispers began to spread, a low murmur of astonishment that added to the strange, electric atmosphere. She was aware of none of it. She had entered a state of complete immersion, where the world outside the piano ceased to exist. Her mind was clear, her hands moved almost automatically, and the music seemed to flow through her rather than from her. Every note carried intention and emotion, every pause and crescendo, deliberate and meaningful. She was not performing for recognition or applause. She was performing because she could not stop. Because this was the only way she could truly express herself. Because the music had been waiting too long to be contained. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes passed, though it felt like seconds. The rhythm of the cafe faded into the background, replaced entirely by the sound of her hands moving across the keys. The melody shifted, becoming more complex, more intricate, yet still accessible, touching something deep in those who listened. Some customers sat in awe, unable to speak, while others wiped tears from their eyes, moved unexpectedly by the purity of the performance. It was a shared moment, even if no one had anticipated it. A collective pause where the world outside the cafe no longer existed. As she played, a memory surfaced: her first performance in a small music school. The feeling of the keys beneath her fingers, the applause that had seemed so distant and unreachable at the time. She had thought those moments lost forever, swept away by circumstance, but now they returned, vivid and alive. She allowed herself to feel them fully, letting the joy, the fear, and the pride mingle with the music. It was a strange, powerful sensation, like stepping into a different dimension where the constraints of daily life no longer applied. Gradually, the room grew completely silent, the usual background noise disappearing as the audience became fully absorbed. Even the baristas and cooks paused, listening from the kitchen, caught in the spell of the unexpected performance. The cafe had transformed from a place of mundane routine into a hall of music, intimate and electrifying. Every note she played seemed to touch someone differently. Some felt nostalgia, others hope, and a few were reminded of dreams they had long abandoned. The power of her music was quiet but undeniable, a subtle force that left an impression deeper than words could describe. When she finally reached the final chord, there was a pause, a moment of suspended reality where the room remained still, as if no one dared break the spell. She opened her eyes, slightly dazed, realizing that she had been playing for longer than she thought. Her heart was pounding, her palms slightly sweaty, but there was a strange exhilaration, a sense of liberation that she had never experienced while serving coffee and cleaning tables. She had forgotten everything else in the world, and for those few minutes, she had been entirely herself. Then came the sound of applause. It started slowly, a hesitant clap from one table, then another. Until the entire cafe was clapping, cheering, and some even standing to express their amazement. People were smiling, laughing with delight, and some were wiping tears from their eyes. Strangers approached her, offering words of praise, unable to believe the talent they had just witnessed from someone they had only ever seen as a waitress. Cameras and phones appeared, though she barely noticed, because the music had already carried her into a place beyond awareness, a place where recognition and reward were secondary to the joy of creation. She stood up from the piano, suddenly aware of the audience around her. Her cheeks were flushed, not from exertion, but from the shock of attention, the strange mix of embarrassment and pride. She had never imagined such a response, had never thought that her music could have such an impact on people. She felt small and vulnerable, yet also powerful, as if the music had unlocked a part of her that had been trapped for years. The cafe, once a place of routine and fatigue, had become a stage for transformation, and she had been the unexpected protagonist. The manager, who had been skeptical of her quiet demeanor for years, came forward, clapping and smiling broadly. He had never seen this side of her, never imagined that behind the apron and the tired eyes was someone capable of creating something so moving. Other customers lingered, unwilling to leave, wanting just a few more moments of connection to the music they had just heard. Some asked questions, curious to know more about her background, her training, and whether she had ever performed publicly. She answered shyly, almost reluctantly, aware that this attention was new and slightly overwhelming, but also exhilarating. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility. A glimpse of a future where music was not just a hidden dream, but a living, breathing part of her life. She had always known that her talent existed, had always carried it silently within her. But now, she had proof that it could touch others. It could create connection, emotion, and joy. It was a powerful awakening, a reminder that dreams do not die simply because circumstances force them into hiding. As the cafe slowly returned to its normal rhythm, the echoes of the music lingered. Conversations resumed, dishes were washed, and the hum of the espresso machine returned to the background. But something had shifted. The ordinary routine now contained a hint of magic, a sense that the impossible had happened, that someone ordinary had created something extraordinary, and she carried that knowledge within her. Quietly but firmly, knowing that the piano, her music, and her courage had opened a door that could not easily be closed. The applause had started softly, almost hesitantly, but it grew steadily into a wave that filled the cafe. At first, she did not know how to react. She had never been the center of attention in her life. All her years behind the counter had trained her to stay in the background, to serve quietly, to keep her voice small and her presence unobtrusive. And now, for the first time, every eye was on her. People were staring, smiling, some with tears in their eyes. Ange felt exposed in a way she had never imagined. The warmth of the moment clashed with the nervous flutter in her chest. She stood there, unsure what to do, feeling as if she had stepped into someone else's story. A story where ordinary people could suddenly become extraordinary. Her hands still hovered near the piano keys, slightly trembling, a remnant of the rush of music and adrenaline. Her heart pounded not with fear, not with shame, but with an emotion she could not immediately name. It was exhilaration, pride, and disbelief all mixed together. She had performed without thinking, without planning, without expectation. And the response had been more than she could have imagined. For a moment, silence returned. The cafe, which had been alive with the soft hum of conversation and movement, seemed to pause, holding its breath. People were still looking at her, unsure of what to do next. Some held their phones mid-air, hesitant to continue recording. Others stared in awe, still absorbing the reality of what they had just witnessed. A few customers whispered to each other, almost in disbelief, repeating words like "I can't believe it" and "she's amazing." The music had done more than fill the room. It had shifted something inside everyone who had heard it. There was no doubt now that she was not just a waitress. She was someone capable of creating moments that would not be forgotten. Her coworkers were among the first to react. A few approached cautiously, unsure whether to congratulate her or leave her be. They had seen her every day, moving silently between tables, efficient, polite, and mostly invisible. They had known she was quiet, sometimes distant, but they had never imagined this depth, this raw talent. One of them finally stepped forward, their voice shaky but sincere, saying simply, "That was incredible." Others nodded, some smiling, some clearly emotional, as if they too had been touched by something beyond ordinary comprehension. She felt a strange mix of pride and humility, unsure how to respond without seeming arrogant or self-conscious. The regular customers were stunned. They had known her as someone dependable, friendly, and polite, but ordinary. They had never imagined that beneath the apron and the gentle smile was someone with such power, skill, and emotion. Some of them lingered in their seats, unable to leave, caught in the aftermath of what they had experienced. Others approached her, shyly complimenting her, asking if she had ever performed professionally. Each question was a reminder of the world outside the cafe, a world where she had long believed her talent might never matter. And now, that world was looking at her, expecting her to step forward, to explain, to be more than she had ever dared imagine. She tried to smile, to acknowledge the applause and the praise, but words felt inadequate. It was as if the music itself had spoken for her, conveying everything that could not be expressed in conversation. She realized suddenly that her life had changed in an instant. Not because she had planned it, but because she had allowed herself to be fully present, to play with honesty and courage. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She had stepped into a new identity, one she had long dreamed of, but had never allowed herself to claim. Some of the younger customers whispered excitedly among themselves, talking about how unexpected and moving the performance had been. A child sitting at a nearby table asked her mother if she could learn to play like that someday. The mother smiled, ruffling the child's hair, but her eyes reflected awe and surprise. Others in the cafe shared similar expressions, smiles mixed with tears, murmurs of astonishment, and the soft shaking of heads as if to clear the disbelief from their minds. She had not merely played the piano. She had shifted the perception of everyone in the room. People were seeing her, truly seeing her for the first time. Her manager, who had been cautious and skeptical in the past, approached with a mix of pride and amazement. His usual professional composure was gone, replaced by a smile that could not be contained. "I've worked here for years," he said, almost in disbelief, "and I've never seen anything like that." His voice carried genuine admiration, and for the first time, she felt recognized not just as an employee, but as a person with unique gifts. The acknowledgement was powerful, a validation that she had carried silently in her heart for years. Waiting for a moment when it could be heard, phones appeared in hands she had never imagined would capture the moment. People recorded short clips, quietly sharing them with friends, their faces reflecting the sense of witnessing something rare. She noticed, almost reluctantly, that the performance was being documented, yet she did not feel embarrassed. Instead, she felt the strange satisfaction of knowing that the music could reach beyond the cafe walls, touching people who might never meet her in person. It was an unexpected reminder that art has no boundaries, that even a brief, unplanned performance could leave a lasting impression on strangers. Some customers approached the piano after the applause, lingering as if afraid to break the magic of the moment. One elderly man ran his fingers lightly over a few keys, smiling softly, as if acknowledging the history of the instrument and the beauty it had produced. Others simply sat quietly, still processing the experience, reluctant to speak for fear of disturbing something sacred. The atmosphere in the cafe had transformed. It was no longer merely a place to eat and drink. It had become a space where human connection, emotion, and talent collided unexpectedly, creating something unforgettable. She could feel the eyes on her, and the intensity was almost overwhelming. Every glance, every whispered comment, and every smile seemed to carry expectation. People wanted more, yet they also respected the completion of what had just occurred. She realized that she had crossed an invisible boundary, from invisibility to recognition, from routine to extraordinary. It was a delicate balance, one she had never navigated before. The realization made her both proud and nervous, her mind racing with thoughts she could not yet articulate. In that moment, she felt a strange sense of responsibility. The music had moved people in ways she had only dreamed of, and she knew that the impact went beyond applause. Some customers were tearful, some were inspired, and some were quietly reflecting on their own lives. She understood more clearly than ever that her talent was not just a personal gift. It was a tool capable of creating change, connection, and emotion. The weight of that understanding was profound. She felt both humbled and honored to bear it. Despite the attention, she tried to remain grounded. She had always believed that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, humility, and persistence mattered just as much. The applause, the praise, and the fascination of the crowd were fleeting compared to the quiet discipline she had practiced for years. She reminded herself that this moment, though powerful, was just one step in a longer journey. The music, her perseverance, and her courage were the true constants. The recognition was temporary, but her skill and determination were lasting. Her coworkers gradually returned to their routines, still glancing at her occasionally, their expressions a mix of awe and curiosity. Some whispered quietly, discussing what they had just witnessed, while others tried to return to normal tasks, but could not completely shake the memory of the music. She watched them, realizing how deeply the performance had affected everyone present. Even those who had been distracted before now carried a new awareness. A quiet understanding that the ordinary could suddenly become extraordinary through effort, talent, and courage. The cafe manager, clearly still processing the event, called a brief meeting with the staff. "That was remarkable," he said, his voice both firm and excited. "I think we've all learned something tonight. Talent can be hidden anywhere, and sometimes it appears when we least expect it." His words resonated with her in a way that went beyond recognition. They acknowledged not only her performance, but the idea that people are capable of more than they or anyone else might imagine. It was a profound affirmation of her hidden potential. Some of the customers who had witnessed the event lingered, unwilling to leave immediately. They asked her questions about her training, her experience, and whether she had performed in other places. Each question was an opportunity, a chance for her to share a piece of herself, though she spoke cautiously. Her voice was soft but confident, and though she did not yet fully understand the significance of what had occurred, she felt a sense of connection with these strangers. The music had opened a door, and they were standing on the other side, curious and eager to understand her story. The aftermath of the performance created a ripple effect beyond the cafe walls. People who had recorded videos shared them with friends, family, and coworkers. The story of the waitress who could play the piano so beautifully spread quietly, like a rumor, gaining momentum with each retelling. Some were inspired to pursue their own passions. Others were moved by the unexpected demonstration of talent in an ordinary place. The impact of her music was growing in ways she could not yet predict, but it felt significant, real, and lasting.